Hello, fellow nerds, geeks, and supporters of indie pop culture creators. Aaron Nabus here, and thank you so much for tuning into the Hall H Show. Joining me on this episode is the multi-talented Neal Hallford. I know him as a filmmaker, fellow sponsor of the International Mobile Film Festival, which takes place in San Diego, California on April 29 and 30. He's a comic convention panel moderator and co-executive producer, along with his wife, Jaina, at Swords and Circuitry, where they produce the audio drama Uncharted Regions, as well as indie movies such as The Case of Evil. He is also well known for being a lead designer and lead writer for various video games. One such game is Betrayal at Krondor. This year, Betrayal at Krondor will be celebrating its 30th anniversary, and Neal has created a Betrayal at Krondor fan film challenge to coincide with it. Submissions will be open on Film Freeway starting now. I guess it was from March 11th, and it'll run through May 20th of 2023. Welcome to the show, Neal. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it has. So we've known each other for quite a while, but I thought this was a really wonderful chance for us to kind of chat about one of my projects. But great to be on and be with the show.
Like many of our heroes, we often talk about their origin story. What's your origin story like? What was teenage Neal like? Where did you grow up, and what were you into at that age, pop culture wise?
Sure. So I grew up. I was a nerd from pretty much early on. I was born in 1966, which means Star Trek and I will always be the same age.
Right.
And so my older brother was a huge Trekkie. And of course, so he instilled that into me very early on. And I remember I saw Trek when it was originally on the air. It debuted in September. I came along in October. And so my brother and I sat me down and I was watching episodes of the original series when it was on TV, but I didn't really have many memories of it until early 70s, which in the afternoons, Star Trek would be replaying sometimes in syndication. But of course, the big thing was, of course, I want to say it was 72 or 73 was the premiere of Star Trek, the animated series.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And and of course, the fantastic thing about the animated series was, of course, is that a lot of the original cast came in, and they a lot. I think it was pretty much everybody, but was it Sulu and Scotty? I think were the only ones who didn't come back, or maybe it was Chekhov. But anyway, but all of the primary cast, so Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and Forrest Kelly were all part of the cast. And of course, the other thing too that was fantastic is that they writers, and so David Gerald came back and wrote another Tribbles episode. DC Fontana was the executive story producer on that, and so a lot of the original talent came back for that, which it was fantastic because you had some really high level science fiction writers writing for this animated show. Which, for the time period was rather exceptional, because you had a caliber of writers that weren't necessarily writing for shows. So in a lot of respects, even though I had seen the original ones, I wasn't old enough to really kind of remember stuff. But the animated series was definitely very heavily concreted into my young consciousness. And I had the James Blish novelizations of the original shows, and then, of course, the Star Trek logs, which were the novelizations of the animated series. And so I started off life as a hardcore, old school Trekkie. And that was my gateway. sort of into fandom. And so because of that stuff, I read a lot of, you know, Ray Bradbury, and of course, I always talk about the ABC. So Arthur C. Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, and Arthur C. Clarke. So that was sort of my entree into fandom, into kind of creative, weird geekdom and such. But as I got older, I remember whenever Doctor Who, first episode of Doctor Who on a Saturday night. It was in my basement, and of course, I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so I believe it was on Friday evenings, we would get we had this weird combination of Cosmos, and which was of course the original series with Carl Sagan, Connections, which was a fantastic program about the history of science, done by James Burke, and this would be followed up by Doctor Who and Monty Python.
Oh, wow. That's an eclectic mix.
And so very eclectic mix of stuff, but I have tremendously fond memories of that stuff. We also had our local version of the movie show that was also on Friday nights after the local news, because in the central the United part of the United States, news comes on at 10 and not at 11. And so after that in Tulsa, there was on the ABC affiliate out there on Channel 8 was the Plenty Scary Movie. And so that was whenever I got my indoctrination into all the classic Universal horror films. You mentioned earlier our short, The Case of Evil, that was hugely influenced by those Universal horror films. But it's also all the Hammer horror films, all the Godzilla movies, and so that's really where I got all of my early kind of indoctrination to all things stuff. I think I saw Forbidden Planet for the first time on the Plenty Scary Movie, and then of course, as we get into the later 70s, we get into the spate of course, obviously Star Wars comes along and changes all of our lives. I remember being just my first exposure to that was actually when my parents and I and my brother were all on a family vacation to Colorado. And while we'd gone into a convenience store, and I saw my very first issue ever of the magazine Starlog. Now, for you young pups who weren't around back then, before there was the internet, if you wanted to know what was going on in the world of science fiction in terms of movies, books, whatever, your lifeline to that was Starlog magazine. And the cover of my first issue of Starlog magazine was issue number 7, which had an X-wing and a TIE fighter on it. And this is before the movie has come out. So it's several months before. And so it's talking about this unusual movie, Star Wars. And I remember reading about that and looking at all the incredible artwork from Ralph McQuarrie. And so we're getting really excited about this movie that was going to coming out. Of course, the thing that really got me excited about it, because it had blueprints for Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet in it. So that was the main reason I was really excited about seeing that. But then again, I got into this, into learning about Star Wars. And then I was an avid subscriber to Starlog. And so that was how I kept track of everything was going on. And so before Close Encounters and before all this other stuff, that was how I kind of got involved with all that stuff. But in terms of being kind of a creator myself, my story becomes kind of starts shortly after that, whenever I am in junior high. And my brother and I used to go out to the Tulsa Flea Market, which was held in the fairgrounds in Tulsa, which is if you ever look up anything about Tulsa, you'll find out about the Golden Driller, which is this large statue, and they redecorate it for all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's kind of one of the iconic things about Tulsa. But it's on the grounds of the Tulsa Fairgrounds, and then again, so when the State Fair comes in, they convene there. But whenever the state fair isn't going on, they would have a flea market every Saturday. And my brother and I would go over there because there was a table there that was run by one of the local comic book shops, and we could go in and get all kinds of amazing stuff. And so we first got interested in going over there because they had the Target Doctor Who novelizations from England. Which at the time were not available in bookstores over here. You could only get them through specialty dealers. And so Tom Baker was running here, the Tom Baker era of Doctor Who was running here in the United States. So for a lot of people, that was the first anybody ever heard about Doctor Who. So a lot of people in the United States started with the Fourth Doctor. And so just, of course, the irony would be is he would also be the longest running Doctor. But anyhow, so we would go over there because we could get the novelizations of like the first and second and third Doctor through this dealer. But anyway, so we were visiting their table, and I saw this really cool looking magazine sitting on the table with other stuff, and it had a cool picture of this really cool rocket ship sitting on the table, and I go, oh, this looks really cool. And then I recognized that it was saying something about Rocket Ship XM, which was a classic 50s sci-fi rocket ship movie. And I said, okay, well, I'll take this home and read more about it because I'm interested in finding out about the making of that. And so the name of this magazine was called Cinemagic. So I take this magazine home and I flip it open, and I'm going through the pages. And then I realized that this is not a magazine about Hollywood. This is not about making movies, traditional movies or whatever. This was a magazine that was a offshoot of Starlog magazine. It actually started off as kind of a zine that was created by a fellow by the name of Don Dohler, who had done a lot of kind of cult indie movies. He was based out in Maryland, and he had done the Alien Factor and some other stuff. But that was how the magazine had started. But Starlog magazine came along, bought up the rights to it, and started publishing their own version of Cinemagic. But anyhow, so this was a magazine oriented at filmmakers who were making sci-fi fantasy movies in their backyards, using 8mm cameras or 16mm cameras, things that ordinary people had. And so this was my first kind of crack into the reality of the idea of indie filmmaking. And it was fantastic because if you wanted to learn how to do makeup effects, if you wanted to learn how to build an optical printer back in the days before everything was digital and you cut everything on a computer, it would show you how to do to create your own beam up effect like they'd had from Star Trek. Some of the early fan films from back in the day was one of the early ones, and I feel really terrible because I'm blanking on the name of it, but there was a really famous Star Trek fan film that was done. It was all shot on film, and they had done, they'd replicated a lot of the effects from Star Trek. And so they showed how they had done the effects. And again, this is all stuff being shot on Super 8 camera, people's backyards. And so I got hugely into the idea of making my own movies and my own films. And so I went out and I pressured my parents. I said, I will do anything I want, or whatever you want me to do. I will wash the car every day with my tongue, whatever, but will you get me a Super 8 camera so that I can start making films? And so I luckily enough, for Christmas, that was my big Christmas present that year, was getting me a camera. So that I could start shooting stuff. It didn't have sound. It was a really pretty basic Super 8 camera, but then I proceeded to make lots of really terrible films.
You have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, you have to start somewhere. And of course, I mean, as I got older, I was really happy to find out is that Super 8 camera is also exactly where Steven Spielberg and George Lucas started. Is they got their start with Super 8 cameras shooting in their backyards. But anyway, so this was sort of my entree into the world of starting to learn about making films myself, learning a lot about visual effects, learning about special effects, and all of this cool stuff. And additionally, whenever I was around the same time, I'm in junior high. I had a incredible English teacher by the name of Ruth Guthrie, and this was when I was in eighth grade. And I remember coming, one day that a lot of times I would get done with assignments earlier than other people in the class, and so I would like draw little doodles in the corners of my papers. And so occasionally I would actually get papers back from the teacher, and she would draw a cartoon along with grade. So she was kind of a favorite teacher. But one time, after we had finished with assignments and everything, she told me, "You need to stay after class." And I'm going, "Oh crap, what did I do?" And generally speaking, we got along or whatever. So I was thinking, man, did I what terrible thing that did I do? So after class, everybody files out, and there was a little stool that was sitting there right next to her chair. And so she said, "Well, I just wanted to have a chat with you because, I've been looking at all the stuff you write. I see, sort of where you are." And she says, "You're going to be a writer when you grow up." And I mean, this wasn't something that she was asking me a question or whatever. She just basically is pointing at me and saying, I've already figured this out. This is where you are destined to go, which was, for being an eighth grade kid, this was just a little shocking. I was interested in writing. I was interested at the time I was writing. So I'd started writing scripts for my little movies and everything. I created an entire script for Doctor Who and the Dalek Crystals uh, that I had written out. But I was super fascinated at the time with Poe, and I'd recently discovered Lovecraft, and so I was writing a lot of horror and things like that. But anyway, I'd made an impression on her about my skills with being a writer and everything else, and she said, "I really honestly think this is what you're really meant to do. And so I want you to start preparing now, even though you're in eighth grade. But right now, if you get a jump on it, there's a lot of things you can do that you can make sure that you are ready. So whenever you're applying for college, that you will start to have some of the skills that you're going to want to have before you start applying to colleges." And so she said, "Next year you need to go into typing, which is the year. So ninth grade was when a lot of people went into typing. And so learn typing, and that will make you eligible and able for you to enter the journalism program once you get to high school." So this was a lot to take in as an eighth grader because,
No doubt.
the teacher is basically mapping it out. This is where you're going to go. But I'm eternally grateful to her because she definitely saw what my skills were and what I was interested in and what I was really good at. And I know that there are a lot of creative folks that didn't necessarily get that kind of leg up that I got. A lot of people who are kind of struggling and they're trying to figure out stuff, and they don't really have anybody that kind of take them under their wing and say, "Here's what's going to happen, and I'm going to help you along." But Mrs. Guthrie was the person that kind of opened my eyes and said, "Oh, this is a career that I could have. This is something that I could do for a living." And so it was thanks to her. Before that, obviously I was like any other eighth grader, because there's like, okay, well, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be an astronaut or I'm going to do whatever. Um, but it was, I really kind of knew from eighth grade on, thanks to Mrs. Guthrie. And then when I got up to high school, I had my journalism instructor in high school was a lady by the name of Laura Schaub. And she kind of took all the stuff that Mrs. Guthrie had done for me and kind of she was like my super booster. And Laura Schaub she went out of her way to do everything to encourage me. She allowed me to start the high school's first literary magazine that was devoted entirely to doing science fiction and fantasy stories. This is, of course, in the 80s, whenever we're still kind of in a ghetto in terms of, okay, if you're into sci-fi and fantasy or whatever, you're a geek, you're a weirdo, and you're definitely not part of normal mainstream culture. We you have a lot of people who will admit in the closet they like, you know, weird science fiction fantasy kinds of stuff, but again, they're not saying this in public. It's not cool to go to school in a Star Wars or a Star Trek shirt, because you're never going to get laid.
I guess you can. I guess you can throw a Space 1999 out the window too. Then.
Oh yeah, Space 1999. Yeah, yeah, and I love Space 1999. And of course, the other thing too is that, you know, certainly by the time I'm in high school, you know, I've been playing D&D for years, but it's high school when I really get involved with the local Dungeons and Dragons group. Had a good friend of mine who was just probably the smartest guy I've ever known in my life, just in terms of just raw like brain power. James Day was this incredible mathematical scientific kind of genius dude, and he was the person running our Dungeons and Dragons games, and so I was part of his role-playing group.
Mhm.
But anyway, so I get to the high school. I start publishing Vortex magazine, which was our science fiction magazine. I wrote a column for the school newspaper called Time Loops. And what I didn't know at the time is that my teacher was taking my Time Loops column and sending them off to state competitions for journalism awards. And so, lo and behold, I start getting awards for things that I haven't applied for.
Wow.
And it was so I won like best column a few months while I was there, and little did I, you know, because again, I didn't know that she'd applied for this stuff. And so the thing that I found fascinating is it wasn't just the fact that this was outstanding column, this was an outstanding niche column, you know, because I was writing about science fiction and fantasy, and I mixed in a bunch of other stuff too. I talked a lot about politics. I remember a whole thing, you know, bitching about nuclear proliferation whenever most of the other stuff in the newspaper is like, well, you know, where to take your girlfriend on Friday night.
Wow.
You know, and you know, I'm covering like big issue, you know, what I consider big issues. And of course, my teacher was uh, definitely one of these kids out of the 60s, super politically engaged, and she definitely saw journalism as a way to go out and we want to talk about the big important issues. And so she sort of instilled all of that in us. And so I'm putting all this crap in this weirdo, you know, column. But you know, most of it's devoted to talking about geeky things, so science fiction and stuff. But occasionally, I'm slipping in and talking about political or social issues in that as well. But so of course, around the same time, so my origin story has kind of several different streams. So I apologize for kind of hopping around here. But at the same time, in junior high, yeah, my brother bought a little pocket, what was basically a pocket computer that was made by Radio Shack. I can't remember the model of it or whatever, but all it looked like was a gigantic calculator that was super wide, but it would allow you to program in BASIC. And so I had learned to kind of do some programming on that, and then later on when I got to high school, people were starting to say, well, you know, you can get home computers. And so my friends have Apples and stuff. So I saw an Atari 400. Now, for you young folks, so Atari used to make a line of computers. Even, you know, a lot of people are familiar with the old 2600 game console with Pong and all that other good stuff.
Right.
But they made a line of computers. And so I had the Atari 400, which was this big clunky sucker that didn't even have keys on it. You had kind of a flat membrane where with keys on it, and so you had to just punch the living crap out of that for it to kind of recognize your keystrokes. But you could type on it, so you could slap your 2600 cartridges into it and play games on it, or you could put in useful things like word processing programs, which was how I basically sold my parents on getting one for me, was because I could write my school papers on it. And I was one of the first people I knew at the high school that was writing papers on a computer. And it made making footnotes so much easier, because for you youngsters out there, in the old days, whenever you were having to create papers and you had to have footnotes and you had to create them manually, oh my God, that was a pain in the butt. Uh, um, but anyway, so I got super interested in computer games, and sort of the world of computer gaming. Um, and of course, the movie, uh, when the movie War Games came out, I was kind of doomed, because I really had the hots for Ali Sheedy. So I went out like David Lightman, and I got all these books on programming, and so I'm teaching myself how to program different computer games, or work on programming stuff. And the reality is that I was crap as a programmer. I'm just because to be a good programmer, you need to be really, really good at math, which I just, as I kind of tell people, is that at best, math and I are frenemies. But I taught myself about how, using computers and working on the idea of computer games. And I had this idea that it would be kind of fun to be a game developer. But I didn't really know enough about it, or I felt like in order to be a game developer back in the day, it meant you had to be a programmer. And so since I didn't really have the passion to go out and really devote myself to becoming a programmer, that wasn't something that I seriously pursued. I did take a couple of classes on programming when I was in college, but again, it just helped me kind of better understand how to work with them. But I didn't pursue that. But what I decided to do instead, I decided to go to the University of Oklahoma. Along the way, I'd stopped at Tulsa Junior College and took several semesters of novel writing while I was there. But when I finally made the move up to the University of Oklahoma, I decided to major in radio, television, and film production. And because I figured that I work in radio, also kind of backing up a little bit, for my first job out of high school, I worked at a radio station as a disc jockey. And part of that involved going in and working in their production studio. So I cut commercials and public service announcements and things like that. So I spent a lot of time working in the studio there. And part of that was I developed an audio drama series called Uncharted Regions, which was sort of a Twilight Zone on the radio kind of thing. It wasn't something that was regular. My buddy and I would do every once in a while when we had time. And that was kind of a fun, crazy kind of thing. And we'll circle back around to the fact that it doesn't really end there. But for the time being, we'll say that it ends in 1989. Anyway, so University of Oklahoma. I go up there and I applied to be in the radio, television, film department at OU. And I really want to work in film. I wanted to be a film major if possible. But the problem was I didn't film back in the day. Being a film major meant going out and being able to basically pay for raw film, 16 millimeter film. And so it actually cost a lot to cover that, because you're paying for the cost of raw film and developing and all that other stuff out of your own pocket. And it was actually pretty expensive to be a film major. And I didn't have the cash to do that. I was a good student, but I didn't have a scholarship, and the school didn't pay for that. So the one thing I did realize is that, well, I didn't have the money to be a film major, but I could get a reel of magnetic tape, and I'd only need one reel per semester for me to record my commercials and other thing else. And so I did my emphasis on radio production. And of course, the job that I'd had coming out of high school had already helped me because I already knew how to do basic production. And so this allowed me to just practice and get better and learn more about working with radio and recording stuff. So that was sort of my journey through OU. Now, a funny little side note when we talk about geeky things. So my last semester at while I was at OU, I was taking a Russian studies class, which was kind of fascinating because this is not too long before the fall of the Soviet Union. But it was a really exciting class, and we were learning a lot about Russian literature, both before, but largely about sort of the period of Russian literature after the rise of the Soviet Union. Because the interesting thing is that there was a lot of science fiction produced during the years of communism in the Soviet Union, largely because if you wrote straight up political commentary about things, you are not going to get censored, and you might very well end up in a gulag somewhere. So there were a lot of writers who would get around this by writing in kind of analogies to what was going on, but they would set it in kind of science fictional world. So I ended up reading a lot of Soviet science fiction, and I got really fascinated with. But at the end of the semester, I'd done really, really well, and I was debating about whether I was going to actually go to the last exam, because our last exam for the Soviet class was also the day that they were releasing Star Trek V. Now, so every Star Trek film before this point, I was there on opening day, first screening. So I was really debating about it. I said, you know what? If I skip the exam, I will still make an A in this class, even if I skip the exam. So I was really debating about whether I should skip going, but I decided no. Okay, so I'm in the last, this is one of my last classes in my last semester before I graduate. I should go in and do whatever. But so I'm sitting there at my desk, and I'm really excited. And I'm just kind of vibrating, and everybody's going, well, what's going on? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of, I'm going to go to see Star Trek V this afternoon, and I'm just really anxious to get done with this so I can go see the movie. And so there are a few more, well, I've never seen Star Trek before, and I don't really know much about it or whatever. And I said, all right, I'll tell you what, it'll be on me, because I if you haven't, been a Star Trek fan or whatever, I want to take you to see the Star Trek movie, because this is going to be amazing. Okay.
It was Undiscovered Country, right? Was that Star Trek V?
No. This was Final Frontier.
Oh, Final Frontier.
And Cybok, and why does God need a starship?
Got it.
And so of course, this is my own personal opinion out here. So Star Trek V was not, unfortunately, the best Star Trek film. I still, and I would submit that it is probably the worst Star Trek film ever made. And there was a lot of things that were different about it. Shatner, wrote this one. They decided, for whatever reason, they didn't have the budget to use ILM for it, so they got somebody else to do it. I think it might have been Doug Trumbull, which is a shame because he was a great special effects person, but again, it was noticeably lower budget than all the other previous Star Trek films.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we get done with our exam. We go over to the theater, and we're watching the movie. And so it starts off in the first 4 or 5 minutes. I go, this is going to be really cool. And then it just continues going on. And it's like we're 15 minutes in, and it's just, oh my God, this is terrible. It's terrible. And so then at one moment, suddenly the image stops on the screen, and then it gets really bright, and it melts in the gate. And so the film melts in the gate of the projector. And so this gives me an opportunity to turn around and say, I am so, so sorry. I don't know what the hell this is. This is not a Star Trek movie. I wish that it's just been Wrath of Khan or The Voyage Home, one of the really good ones. This unfortunately ain't it. This is terrible, and I am so sorry. At least none of you are out any cash for this. But anyway, but so anyhow, going back to sort of my path and things here. So as I'm getting ready to leave Norman, Oklahoma, which is where the University of Oklahoma is. So for you people who are football fans, this is the Sooners. Um, so I'm getting ready to leave, and a good buddy of mine by the name of Ken Mayfield contacts me, and Ken is asking me if I might be possibly interested in going to work for a company that he started working for, because he's been doing illustrations for Task Force Games. Now, Task Force Games were the makers of a game called Starfleet Battles, which was basically a strategy tabletop version of Star Trek, except it's all focused on ship to ship combat. And he was doing the covers and some of the illustrations inside of some of their game books. And at the time, I was going, well, I don't really know what I could do for them, but he had gotten a gig to work at New World Computing, who were the makers at the time. They're still best known for having made the role playing series Might and Magic. So he contacted me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming out and working at New World?" And because he had been teaching me how to paint with an airbrush, and so I was doing some stuff with airbrush and nebulas and planets and stuff like that. And I said, "But realistically," I said, "there's nothing I could really do for you as an artist, because you guys would fire me, and you'd end up looking bad for bringing me out and whatever, because it's like, clearly, here's your buddy, and why is he here? Because I could draw stuff, but honestly, it would take me 3 times as long as it would take you to do it. Plus, it would never be anywhere near as good as whatever you do. And so I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to turn you down, as cool as that would be." I meanwhile end up working at a direct mail place, creating ads for these companies that were doing things like, well, send us $50 and we'll send you holy water from Lords. And they were doing a lot of really shady, weird things that I just did not feel comfortable with, but it was a job that was paying me. So I'm working there for a little while, and so Ken Mayfield calls me back again, and he says, "We have a job here at New World. They're about to let go of the writer that is currently working for us, and so you'd basically get to come out and write science fiction and fantasy on contract."
Wow, talk about an awesome opportunity.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, a regular steady gig. This is not me like write something and send it to a publisher and hope I get published. This is like, here, you have a salary, you have a paycheck, you have benefits, come out, and it's working on computer games. So, okay, wow. Here's this because so New World Computing had bought Task Force Games, and so they were going to start taking Starfleet Battles and turning it into the original plan was to take Starfleet Battles and turn it into a computer game. So they'd gotten Ken as part of that process. So anyway, so they made this offer to me to come out and interview. So I flew out to meet John Van Caneghem, who was the head of New World Computing, and again, the guy who'd created Might and Magic. So he was already this really kind of legendary big early figures, kind of up there with Ken and Roberta Williams and folks like that, particularly among the role playing set of folks. So we had this interview, and it was kind of funny because I was sitting in his office, and because I'd sent him some of my radio drama scripts that I'd done for Uncharted Regions as samples of dialogue that I could write. And then I'd also send him samples of Call of Cthulhu scenarios that I had created, which again was there's a big tabletop game that was oriented around the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And so this was all a bunch of stuff that kind of stuffed in an envelope and sent as samples. So I'm sitting in JVC's office, and we go through the whole thing of the interview and everything. And I said, "So, do you have an idea of when you might be making a decision, just so I have an idea what the wait period will be?" And he said, "Oh, well, we've hired you. We just wanted to make sure you get an opportunity to meet you face to face before we made before we made the decision."
Where did you fly out to?
And so I flew out to Van Nuys.
Oh, wow.
So I was up in Van Nuys, California, and so that was only the second plane trip I'd ever made in my life. And so I moved. I went back home, and so I was supposed to start in 2 weeks later. So I went back home, and my cousin and I, we loaded up my really crappy '73 Mustang that was on its last legs. And then my cousin had a big, one panel van that we loaded all the stuff into. And so the deal that we made is because my Mustang was in such terrible shape, he said, I'm only going to keep like really unimportant crap in the car with me. And I said, if it dies along the side of the road, we'll just abandon it and keep going in the van. And so we made the trek out. This would have been it was early enough that we hit a snowstorm when we were going through Albuquerque. So I want to say it might have even been as late as April, or something. But this would have been in early 1990. And so I landed at New World Computing, and so I began my first stretch of time living out here in California. So my first stint as a Californian, starting in 1990, and of course, what a huge change of world it was for me, because I'm moving from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm living out kind of in the suburbs of Tulsa, and just as sort of Beaver Cleaver. Ordinary kind of place that you can get. A lot of times, folks around there wouldn't even necessarily lock their doors at night, just because it was just the most ordinary, boring, white bread kind of neighborhood that you could imagine.
It's basically
And
Mayberry.
yeah, it was totally Mayberry. And to move from that to Van Nuys, California, it was right during the early 1990s. The really big thing that was going on in the news is we were having this weird spate of freeway shootings. So people are shooting at each other on the 405. And so this is on the news. And so this is right before I move out. And so I'm going, holy shit, what am I moving moving out into? And I get to Van Nuys, California, and there are bars on the windows. A lot of these businesses here, and the apartment complex I'm moving into has a 10-foot wall around the outside of it with concertina wire around the top of it. And I'm going, holy shit, I've moved to a demilitarized zone. And so gigantic change in worlds for me. But of course, obviously, it was a really fantastic experience, because it was kind of like moving. Ultimately, what ended up happening, I spent very little time actually at my apartment. I spent most of it at New World, which was actually located further up in Woodland Hills. And it was, of course, the fun irony of that is the fact that the major shopping mall in Tulsa was called Woodland Hills.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so that was kind of funny, is that I moved from Tulsa, going to Woodland Hills Mall all the time, and I spent all my day at Woodland Hills, in Woodland Hills at New World Computing. But New World Computing was like it was like living in a college dorm room, to be honest. There was 30 of us. That were there in a suite of offices on the second floor of this little tiny office complex. We were all hardcore gamers. There were only 2 or 3 of us there that were married. I was still a young single guy, but pretty much everybody else was unmarried. And so we lived and we worked and played there for the most part. And so whenever we weren't working on whatever games we were supposed to be working on, uh, we so we'd be playing. Of course, we had, because they had bought Task Force Games and Starfleet Battles. We had the best Starfleet Battles players, ranked players in the country there, and so the games that we of Starfleet Battles that we would play there were intense. um, and Starfleet Battles, there was never ever a session of playing Starfleet Battles. It was less than 8 hours long. I mean, it was just hours. So we'd be up there in the middle of the night, going out and buying bags full of Del Taco tacos and burgers, and playing Starfleet Battles. But it was a really incredible experience. But part of that time that was really exciting is that one of the ladies who was an artist there was a lady by the name of Bonnie Himzath. Now, Bonnie's husband and she and her husband Greg were really deeply connected with the science fiction community in Los Angeles, and so every month they would have a big potluck over at their house, and so some of the regular guests that we met while we were at the potluck were Larry Niven, Jerry Pournelle, uh, 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 Kelly Frias, who was one of the classic illustrators from the pulp days. That's probably someone name you might recognize, or maybe not. But he did a lot of the classic sci-fi illustrations in the pulps back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But all of these major league science fiction folks were over at their house, and so I'm hanging out with these people on weekends, and it was it was like having a little convention every month over at their house. And we'd go over and we'd sit in the backyard, and they'd build a big bonfire. And of course, there were a bunch of SCA folks that were involved with them. There was also another gaming group that some of the people who lived in the same house with them worked at a company that built a game called Fairy Tale Adventure, which was another well-known RPG around the time. And so there was this incestuous relationship with all these kind of different game companies that were based there in LA. But I just met all of these incredible people. And at the time there used to be a fantastic bookstore in Santa Monica called A Change of Hobbit.
Nice.
Dangerous Visions bookstore was up out in the valley. And I was listening to, at the time, one of the first, before there were any big podcasts or whatever, there was KPFK Pacifica Radio, which broadcast Hour 25 with Warren James. And Warren James would have all of these major league science fiction folks that were on. And it was kind of funny because one night I was driving along, and I'd just gone up to go to Griffith Park Observatory. And I was coming back down the hill, and I was listening to Hour 25, and he's talking about Tunnels and Trolls, which was the first game I went out to work on for New World. And so we were. He was talking about the pen and paper role playing game Tunnels and Trolls, on which our game had been based. So anyway, the LA period was really fascinating because I met all kinds of amazing, incredible folks during that time period. But sci-fi creators, comic creators, musicians, just all kinds of amazing folks. But during the time while I'm at New World, I meet John Cutter. And John Cutter has come from Cinemaware, which was a game company that was well known for making, as you can kind of tell by the name of the game company, they really approached the idea of computer games as interactive movies. And John had worked on a really big title called Wings, which of course was inspired by the old classic 1920s movie Wings. But he worked on a game that I think the ideal had been to get the Rocketeer license, but at the time they couldn't get it, so they did something that was kind of like it, but it was something like Rocket Man or Rocket something, but it was definitely something that was at least inspired by Rocketeer.
Mm-hmm.
He worked on a Three Stooges game and some other stuff, but but anyway, so John comes over to New World because unfortunately, CinemaWare had closed, and he ends up at New World. And he and I became really good buddies. I was working on a science fiction game by that time called Planet's Edge, which was basically we fused kind of Star Trek and another well-known game around the time called Starflight, and we kind of fused the because there was a portion of it where you're flying around in space with a spaceship and you're improving your spaceship and fighting other alien ships and making improvements to your ships. But then you would go to different planets because there were things that you need to achieve, and you would beam down, and then it basically turned into an RPG. And you're walking around, and every planet you would go to was essentially a Star Trek episode, or very much like a Star Trek episode. And so I was riffing on Star Trek, Doctor Who, Space 1999, every science fiction show that I had kind of seen growing up. I was kind of riffing on different episodes or different ideas that I'd seen with those things. But anyway, so John and I had become really good friends. So he was the producer on that particular title, and I was writing and handling all the design related to the on the ground stuff. But after a while, he got an offer from a company called Dynamics, which was up in Eugene, Oregon, and so Dynamics was a company. They had been purchased by Sierra Online, who were the kings of all these classic adventure games back in the early 90s. When you think about the 90s and adventure games, Sierra Online were pretty much the kings of that genre. So
I remember the name for sure.
Yeah. And so you think about King's Quest, and you think about Gabriel Knight and some of the other folks. And so they were the people responsible for doing all of this other stuff. So they'd purchased Dynamics in 1990, or at least were distributing for them. I'm not entirely sure what the exact nature of the relationship, but we were considered a subsidiary of Sierra Online. So John had he got an offer to go work for Dynamics, and it would have definitely was a salary boost for him, and also they were negotiating with him because he wanted to have a little more creative control over what he was working on. So he moved up there, but before he left, I said, if anything comes up where you want someone to write for you, I would really like to work with you, because we were very much in simpatico when it comes to creatively. We were good friends, and I knew that we could build something really amazing together. So during this time period, Jeff Tennell, who was the head of the CEO of Dynamics at the time, was reading a book called Silverthorn by Raymond D. Feist. Now, back in the day, there were several big name fantasy authors, on the kind of the book market, and so there was David Eddings and Terry Brooks and these folks, but Feist was one of the big 2 or 3 fantasy authors of that time. So Ray was, or not Ray, but Jeff was reading Silverthorn, and he thought, I think that this might make a really cool computer game. So he contacts Raymond D. Feist, and he says, I would like to talk to you about possibly taking the game Silverthorn and adapting it as a computer game. And I'd like you to come and write this for us if you'd be open to that. And Ray said, well, first of all, you can't afford me. And he said, but what you can do is, if you want to, buy a license to the universe that my books are set in, and you can adapt that or whatever you want to do with that. So meanwhile, so Jeff Tennell appoints John to be the person in charge of this adaptation. So John gets a hold of me and offers me a chance to work on this project, and I have a really loony kind of interview with them, because I go up and I'm supposed to meet with, see the company and walk around and see everything there. and what happens is is Jeff Tennell is busy, and it's just every time we contact him, well, he's out, he can't whatever, but he'll get with you at such and such a time, and so that time would arrive, and he's still busy. We'll meet you at blah, and so it's going on, and we're getting closer to the time that I'm supposed to be hopping an airplane back for L.A. And as far as as far as New World knows, I'm out sick that day, and so anyway, we're it's like my plane's going to leave at like 5:30 or something like that. And finally, like
this is in Oregon, right?
This is in Oregon. It's in Eugene, Oregon. So it's a little town. It's a college town of about 100,000 people is where Dynamics was located. And so finally, it's like 4:00, 4:15, something like that, or whatever. And we're getting ready to leave. And finally, Jeff Tennell's secretary calls us and say, Jeff Tennell will meet you. Jeff will meet you down at the airport, and he'll talk to you there. So I get down to the airport, and there's Jeff Tennell. And so my interview is literally running through the airport, going through, bag check and running down towards, at least it wasn't intense like it is now with, post 9/11, but still, I had to go from one end of the airport down to my gate. And so my interview is running through the airport with Jeff Tennell talking about everything. So finally we get up to the gate, and he says, well, if John's good with you, that's good enough for me. You sound great. And so we'll hire you. So anyway, so I start to work with them on Betrayal at Krondor. Now, the game that will become Betrayal at Krondor. Now, their proposal again had been to start with the idea that we're going to take Silverthorn and we're going to adapt it into just a straight up adaptation of the book. And I said, I don't really think that's terribly interesting, to be honest, because for me, the idea that I'm one of Feist, the idea is we're going to bring in Feist readers and turn them into game players. But if I already know what all the big dramatic turns are in the book, it's not very interesting for me to say, okay, I'm just going to go in and make the same decisions as whatever's in the book. There are no real surprises to me. You could alter it a lot where there are different possibilities, but I said, but then it's not really an adaptation of the book. And I said, how about instead of that, there are, at the time, I believe there are 6 books that are available. Ray is working on book number 7. And I said, rather than just adapting Silverthorn, there's a point where there's a 20-year gap between 2 books, Darkness at Sethanon and Princes of the Blood. Let's pick a spot right between the 2 of them and build a brand new game. And that is where Betrayal at Krondor came from.
Were you already familiar with the source material?
No. No. So whenever I had started reading Magician, the first book, whenever I was a kid. And so, but the thing about it is that I read like 3 pages into it and I found out the main character's name was Pug. And I thought, this is the worst name ever for a main character. And I threw the book across the room and I never picked it up again.
Oh, wow.
So, and I also didn't like the cover, which had a picture of something that looked like a heron on the cover. And it was just a terrible cover. Anyway, so John brings me up and I don't know anything about it. And so here are the books. And so I start reading the books. And I read, before we were done with development, I'd read through the entire, all of the books that he had available at the time, at least 3 times. And I had a notebook that was pretty much a novel itself, that was just going through and finding references to things and figuring out his universe, figuring out his writing style. And so, but I made it my life's goal to basically be the expert on all things Midkemia, so that we could send notes to Feist and he would make commentary on stuff, but I knew that I couldn't rely on being able to always get an answer or get a quick answer to things. And so I just needed to have the answers at my own fingertips. And so by the time I was done, I knew everything there was to know about Midkemia, which was the name of the universe this was set in. So I was the principal writer on the project. John Cutter also helped me kind of create the major overall plot line of the game, but all the major quests, all the kind of day to day stuff, all the text that face the player, I wrote pretty much all of that. So there are some of there are houses in some of the zones that you can knock on the door and you'll chat with people. And John wrote some of those messages, but I would say 80-90% of what you see in the game in terms of writing, dialogue, all that stuff, that's all me. Um, but anyway, the game went out and it became it did pretty well as an RPG or as a game, and then it got placed on CD-ROM, and then the sales went through the roof because we were the first RPG on CD-ROM, which was a brand new, spanking new technology at the time. And lots of people wanted a new game to play with their sparkly, shiny new CD. And so, bang, we came along, and our musician on the project had an opportunity to go in and create this fantastic soundtrack that was designed not just to use the little external MT32 sound module, but was designed to be played on the CD-ROM. So, incredible soundtrack created by Jean-Paul Moorhead. And it became a major hit. And as a result, it ended up being a really influential. We won all kinds of awards. We were in Computer Gaming World's Hall of Fame in 2000. We got inducted into that. Won several best of the game of the year or best RPG of the year awards. And it ended up being extraordinarily successful. And I'm super grateful that I got the opportunity to participate in that and be involved with that.
It looks like even the author, I guess, created a book adaptation of the game, right?
Yes. So in I believe it was 97, so 4 years after we released the game, he novelized Betrayal at Krondor into Krondor the Betrayal. I think that his publishers just wanted to invert things just so that there wasn't a confusion about which was the game and which was the book or whatever. And then he wrote two subsequent novels which were based on a sequel that we had begun at Dynamics, which unfortunately, just because of some weird political nonsense that was going on at Dynamics at the time, had got canceled. But I'd written a sequel to it, and some of the material of that he ended up using for the subsequent book sequels from Krondor the Betrayal. And so the stuff that I created for the game became canon for the rest of his book series.
Mm. Would you mind briefly telling us about the Betrayal of Krondor, and why do you think it still resonates even 30 years later?
Well, of course, so it's a fantasy role playing game, though it's kind of an interesting hybrid between a role playing game and a adventure game. We had a lot of new kind of features about it. Is before Grand Theft Auto came along, people used to talk, kind of credit them with kind of creating the open world kind of model where you roam anywhere or whatever. We actually did something that was kind of like that with Betrayal at Krondor several years earlier, because it was divided up into different chapters, and we had this gigantic map, and for the most part, we let you go pretty much anywhere you wanted to go. We had something that was designed by John Cutter, were our puzzle puzzle boxes that had riddles on them. That was not something that, there were riddles that had appeared in other RPGs, but the kind of unique character of the riddle chests, that's something that has since been copied by a lot of other RPGs and other things over the years, but that was John Cutter's kind of creation. So that was very influential. But and then again, we were the first RPG on CD-ROM. But I think that the main thing that people love about the game, and I feel self-conscious saying this, but one of the reasons that people continue to talk about it is that that people really love the story. They really feel they. A lot of people, again, for years and years, most people thought that Raymond E. Feist wrote it, and with good reason, because his name's on the outside of the box, not mine. um, but I am in the credits or whatever. But again, we were promoting this as something coming from his universe, and the idea was we were going to bring in his readership and turn them into gamers. And the interesting fact is that we actually took a lot of our gamers and turned them into Feist readers. And so I can't tell you the number of people who have told us is that they discovered Feist by playing our game first. And so that's been kind of exciting. It was hugely popular in Eastern Europe. We have a lot of German folks, a lot of Russians, and other folks who gigantic fans of Feist. And over in Europe, Feist is almost as big as Tolkien is.
Oh wow.
So it's really interesting to that how much fandom that we've had generated over there because of Betrayal at Krondor. But anyway, but I think it's just that it's a big, very heroic kind of story. There's sort of some important sacrifices that get made. If you like Lord of the Rings, you would like the Midkemia universe, because it's kind of the world of Middle Earth, but you scratch off the serial numbers and you change a few details, and you kind of got a lot of what's going on in Midkemia. So we've got elves, we've got dwarves, we've got all that kind of stuff. So if you're comfortable in a high fantasy kind of setting, Feist universe, Feist games, that's going to be something that feels familiar to you. But it's a big epic story, and it's in a big epic kind of game. And also, oddly enough, because we had envisioned it as a kind of interactive novel, which is kind of a weird thing. But because it was based on a series of books, we actually decided to frame the game. So there's actually quite a bit of text in it that is I presented as though you would go up and have an encounter. And sometimes where we simply didn't have the budget, we didn't have an engine that could do the crazy kind of cutscenes that became available a few years later. We would have a lot of encounters where you would be hit with this kind of a big kind of text interaction, and that was like reading a book. And lots of people really loved the text. They really loved the reading the story and felt like it was like being immersed in a game. And so you're playing, you're reading a book, you're reading a book, and then suddenly you go on an adventure and you do some other stuff, and then there's another section where it might be kind of a little cutscene, or it might be sections out of a book. And so, but I just like to think of it like it's a high fantasy novel of the time that you also could play sections of. And so you would have combat, just like a regular RPG, and you explore the world. It's a big 3D world. That was another thing, is we were the second 3D game, for 3D RPG to be released. We got beat just slightly before. We were slightly behind Ultimate Underworld. But at least we had an ending to our game. But anyway, but I think it's just largely that we had some really unique gameplay elements to what's going on. You could like dig up graves. That's because I'm a weirdo. But so we had some unique gameplay elements to it, but we also had a story that people really related to, and made them, have that warm, fuzzy feeling they had whenever they read their favorite fantasy novels.
What's it like interacting with the fans of the game and also seeing how it has influenced other games?
It's really exciting. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that here we are. So this year is our 30th anniversary since we released. And, over the years, I get at least a handful of letters every month from someone who played the game, and they tell me about how it was the first computer game they ever played, or the first RPG they ever played. There's a fellow by the name of Damian Mosaic who is making his a game called Call of Serignar, and it's hugely influenced by Betrayal at Krondor. and he told me the first time that we ever chatted about what he's working on is that he learned how to read English to play the game, because he learned it by playing the game. Is he would read the stuff I'd written, and he would go out and he'd grab a dictionary and he learned English. And he's not the only person that's told me a story like that. As people who actually said that computer games were illegal in the country when they were where they were growing up, and said that it was actually an act of rebellion to even own a computer game. But they were playing Betrayal at Krondor because they loved it so much, and there was their own kind of act of rebellion to play Betrayal at Krondor.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that's crazy to me,
It is.
but it's also it's amazing that it meant that much to people. Before Betrayal at Krondor came out, a lot of people would often say that computer games will never be art. And I mean, I know that you have experienced that talking to comic creators and other people, is that X and X will never ever be art. X, for whatever reason, but we have a rather dramatic ending, and a lot of people ended up being very emotionally shaken by what happens with an important character in the game, and we emotionally moved people with some of the things that happened in that game. And so I would say, that to me is the real mark about whether you've made art, is whether you can emotionally move people by the experience.
What motivated you to create the fan film challenge as a way to
But yeah,
celebrate the 30th anniversary?
so the 30, so we're going to have a big party on June 23rd up in Eugene, Oregon. We're getting together as many developers as we can, but also fans or just friends of ours who live up there to get together. We're going to hang out, have a big party, and just kind of celebrate this particular game. And I was thinking about, well, what was something cool we could do to make this a kind of a special experience for everyone? And I thought, I'm a filmmaker, and people have sent me art. They've sent me fan fiction. They've sent me all kinds of other stuff related to Betrayal at Krondor. I said, but I've never seen a Betrayal at Krondor fan film. And I know a lot about the fan film community simply because, the Star Trek fan film stuff has been around for ages. People have been bringing fan films. And I thought, how cool would it be if we had some folks go out and create some Betrayal at Krondor fan films? And we'll create a challenge and treat it like, have people treat it like the 48-hour film festival. And so you'll go in, and as long as it's within the larger context of about the game itself, but you can kind of change the genre around and say, so it's a horror film because we have some kind of horrific elements that are in the game. You could turn it into a romance. You could do whatever. And I said, even if you don't have costumes, say reframe it, said it's Betrayal at Krondor, but it's actually a 70s buddy cop movie. And so, but the main thing is just kind of have fun with it and kind of express your love and your affection with it. And so, I'm going to bring in some really cool judges. One of the cool people we've already got associated with this is Bonnie Gordon, who plays the voice of the computer in Star Trek Prodigy. She's going to be one of our judges for the fan films. I've got a couple of other interesting folks I'm having conversations with, and we'll be announcing more about judges over the next month or two. But the competition opened up on Film Freeway on the 11th. We will run through the competition will stay open until May 12th. And so so fans have, 2 months to basically create their films, edit them, and submit them to us, which is a lot more time than people doing 48-hour film festivals do.
Right.
If you don't know a lot about the games, you don't have to worry about never having played it, because if you hop on YouTube, there are tons of people who have created walkthroughs and let's plays. And so you can see all kinds of stuff about the game through those, also on Twitch. So there are a lot of places where, you can go on there and hop on and find out sort of what some of the content is, who the characters are. So you have those kind of resources. There are tons of people who have friends that are into cosplay, that are in the SCA or whatever. But again, if you don't even have the costumes, don't worry about it. If you want to do, like, we're going to do this scene out of the game, but we're going to do it in contemporary dress, that's fine. That's great. The main thing we just wanted you to do is have some kind of fun and help us kind of celebrate this particular anniversary.
Yeah, and for more information about the the Fan Film Challenge, you can go to krondorffc.com for more information. Um, and I guess before I let you go, we'll do a quick little thunder round.
Oh, sure.
I guess my first question is, do you still eat Del Taco?
Yes, I do. I do. The Dell is still my favorite. I stick with the classics or whatever, but that is actually my preferred taco is the Dell Taco Dell.
Wow, it left an indelible impression on you.
It did. It did. And so I mean, whenever I was growing up in Tulsa, we had Taco Bell. But I actually prefer Del Taco, and of course, living in San Diego, there are a lot of amazing other tacos here. But
Sure.
Del Taco tends to be my go-to.
Right. Why is reading important to you? And tell us about your PSA for
Oh
RIF.
yes,
Reading is
yes.
fundamental.
Yes. Okay. So again, kind of going back as we talked about earlier in the interview, I am whatever I am working on, whether I'm working on films or whether I'm working on games or whatever. I am a writer, storyteller first, last, and always. But reading is super important because. As I tell people is that unless you have people who are readers, you're not going to have the people that are writing your favorite comic books, movies, books, whatever. All writers start off by being readers, and so I really want to support young people being encouraged to read as much as possible. And so in conjunction with our anniversary, we are really encouraging people to go to rif.org, rif.org, and find out how to participate, because RIF is an organization. They've been around for a long time, but they support literacy programs with kids. They also provide books to disadvantaged kids, so gives them an opportunity to own books for themselves, which again is really important. I think that having access to books myself as a little kid was important, because if I was bored or I was kind of a sick kid when I was little and I had asthma, and so a lot of times the only thing I could do was read a book, and so I'd go over to my nightstand where I had my collection of Star Trek logs and other stuff, and I could read, and that turned me into a person that used my imagination a lot, and that made me a writer. So again, terribly important to kind of support literacy, support reading. So rif.org, go there. Multiple ways to donate and be involved with their programs.
What band, music, or type of music that people who know you would be surprised that you listen to?
Wow. Okay. One thing that I love a lot of the musicals from the 1990s. Uh, that would be something that some people might surprise people. Phantom of the Opera was a big one. Into the Woods. Those are things I was listening to. Chess was a gigantic favorite of mine. Of course, was co-written by one of the members of ABBA. So that might be one of the things that surprised people or whatever. I actually have a pretty eclectic musical taste. I of course love kind of Renaissance and medieval music, classical music, but I also jazz. I'm also a musician myself, so I compose. So I work on soundtracky kind of stuff. But Really the only genres that I don't really listen to is I don't really listen to country music, and I don't listen to rap, and I'm not really into like contemporary gospel. Like really old spiritual stuff is actually pretty awesome, but like the new praise music, I don't get into it all.
Hmm. What's one thing you miss from Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Oh my God, there's so many things. I mean, obviously the first thing is my people, is my family and friends that are back there. But Another thing is, of course, the food. There's chicken fried steak is the state food, and it is a challenge to get to get a really good chicken fried steak out here in California. There are things that are close, but still, there's nothing that beats chicken fried steak in Oklahoma. The barbecue, it's hard to find really good barbecue, because you can have people that will be, it's like either vinegary or whatever, and go, that's not real barbecue, at least not to me. So the food is thing, but a really gigantic thing is the weather. I
Mm.
grew up with tornadoes and thunderstorms and lightning. And to me, that's normal weather. And so whenever it doesn't rain for prolonged periods of time, which being in San Diego, that's not something, I mean, actually we've been kind of it's freakish because we've actually had the past couple of weeks we've had lots of rain, which I've just been so happy about. I just wish it would thunder and lightning some. um, because to me that really feels like the world's really alive, and I feel very inspired and energized whenever I'm in a thunderstorm or in a lightning storm. That's really exciting. But I really miss that.
What's one popular movie and one deep cut movie that resonates with you, and why do they resonate with you?
Okay, one popular movie. Oh, wow. These are always tough. But honestly, my go-to movie is like if I had to name like the one, Raiders of the Lost Ark is the popular movie that is uh, is something that just it's the whole shebang for me. It's amazing storyline, the adventure, the fun, the fact that Harrison Ford is doing most of those things as real stunts. It's not CGI. I mean, there are visual effects in it or whatever, but primarily it's real people doing real stunts. I mean, he broke his foot while he was doing the fight scene in the flying wing. That soundtrack, oh my god, I still
Mm-hmm.
think it's a toss up for me between whether that John Williams is incredible, and so there's Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Superman soundtrack,
Oh yeah, I
the
love the Superman soundtrack.
the 1941 soundtrack, which not as many people know. Um, but those are all, but John Williams, just those incredible scores. I still think that he's still the greatest living composer alive. I hope that we get to continue to have him, even though I know he's up there, but as long as he can stay with us. Um, so a deep cut movie. Wow. Okay, so a deep cut movie is Gargoyles, which was a made for television horror film, which had early special effects done by, I believe it was Rick Baker, who, of course, later is known for American Werewolf and some other stuff. But I believe that's Rick Baker's stuff. Scared the living crap out of me as a little kid. And any chance to watch, if Gargoyles shows up on television or whatever, I'll stop everything and watch it beginning to end. I have a copy of it or whatever. But I actually admit I have a deep weakness for a lot of the made for television 70s horror movies, because they're all this was an incredible period of Bigfoot's, UFO, the paranormal, psychic phenomena, Satan devil cults, all these things that were going on, and just some amazing stuff that range from this is really incredible and this is incredibly bad. Um, but I have a deep love for those things.
Oh my gosh, I just had a flashback of I think I remember Tom Selleck in some sort of Devil Dog movie or something like that. I don't
Oh,
know. It's kind of
probably.
weird.
Very probably. There was Crowhaven Farm. There was Satan's Triangle, which actually, if you've seen the movie Ghost Ship, it's kind of like I almost feel like Ghost Ship. They watched that one, but just loads and loads of great scary movies. And of course, this is the period out of which Kolchak, the Night Stalker, comes out of. Anyway, but I love that old stuff.
And my last question for the Thunder Round is what's one word you would use to describe yourself?
um Lunatic. uh, um 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 I would say, if I had to pick a word, and this is going to sound maybe a little pretentious, but I would say passionate.
I
uh
can, from our conversation, from me knowing you, I can tell you're definitely passionate.
is that I'm someone that tends to be deeply motivated and moved by my passion. So whether I'm creating things or whether I'm trying to be politically active to fix things or whatever, and that's what I tend to be most attracted to in other people, to other creators or whatever, is people where I see that they have a creative fire that you just like, I have to do this because I couldn't possibly do anything else, possibly not create. And those are the kinds of people that I really jive with a lot, are people that are just deeply devoted and passion, care about the things they're creating.
Mhm. Is there anything else about Betrayal at Krondor, or the fan film challenge, or any of the anniversary event that you'd like to share that we haven't covered yet?
Um, Not that I can think of. So even though it's primarily set up about the fan film challenge, if you go to the website, so the krondorffc.com, we also have a link so that you can go to a Facebook group where our event, where we are letting people sign up to attend. There's no charge to attend, but we're just using that so we can kind of have a head count of who's intending to show up, just so that we're prepared for however many people show up. I'm also posting things in there. But if you want to kind of keep up to date about the anniversary event, if you want to show up on the 24th, which is the day after our in-person get together in Eugene, we're going to do an online event. Which is going to be, we're going to be talking to fans all around the world about, playing the game, why they love it, what things they enjoy. We may have some playthrough stuff. We're going to show our official selections uh, uh, from our film challenge there. Hopefully we get a chance to talk to the film creators with that. I don't have a website to give to you yet. We will, of course, have a link on Krondor FFC ultimately, which will tell you where you can go to watch all of this crazy online stuff on the 24th. So that will be on June 24th. But so keep tuned there if you want to do that. And just the other thing is, if you're interested in participating in the fan film stuff, really want to encourage people, because if you've never made a film before in your life, just keep in mind, and this is something that Aaron and I, and I'm sure our good friend Susie Patello would
Shout out to
really like to
Susie.
remind you. Susie, hi Susie, is that you don't have to have a fancy film camera. You don't have to have, some really expensive equipment. A lot of people are making feature-length films using their home or using their smartphone, cell phone, whatever you want to talk about. And so you don't have to have crazy expensive equipment. You can make something that's fun with that. Some people might be dragging old, somebody was asking me if they could use their old camcorder. I said, sure, whatever you want to use. And don't worry, we're not competing for Oscars here. The main thing is just show some of your love for the game, or just, go out and treat it like a 48-hour film festival. You might not know anything about this before you get started, but if you go out and you do a little bit of research with the YouTube stuff, it's really easy to get really familiar with it pretty fast.
I can only imagine what you would have done with a smartphone when you were a kid.
Oh, yeah. If I'd had a smartphone and I had all the digital editing tools that I have access to now, oh my God, I would have done some really crazy stuff. I still need to take some of I have a Doctor Who commercial that I shot when I was in my journalism class, and I shot on my 8mm camera. And I didn't have, so the soundtrack was recorded separately on a cassette. So that was kind of when we were in the room and I'm showing them the film, I'm having to like push play on the recorder and run the recorder at the right time. So it took a lot of practice to get them so they would sync up or whatever. But oh man, to have had access to that kind of technology. But the great thing is that you don't even have to have software on your computer, because we had a young lady who did a film named Jennifer Zhang, and she made a fantastic film that was 2 years ago, I believe.
Right.
That has it's got international distribution and all this other stuff, and she shot that
called Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon,
Yeah.
and so Charon, I believe.
Right.
And she shot that and edited it all on her phone.
That's incredible.
So you don't have to have crazy expensive equipment. You can go out this, grab your friends, and do this in an afternoon. And because people do shoot, because when people do the 48-hour film festival, they write, edit, produce everything in 48 hours. You've got 2 months. So don't be afraid, and just go out there and enjoy yourself. And because you may never have really thought about being a fan filmmaker, but I want to encourage you to try, because you meet a lot of really cool, fun people. Get involved with your local filmmaking community if there's anybody around there, or your local SCA or your Ren Fair friends, because you find plenty of folks that will be willing to hop in front of the camera and do goofy sword fights or whatever. And also Don't, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I am on Instagram. So if you have any questions about this or about the game or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. I also have a blog. So Neal Hallford, NealHallford.com. And you can go and check out things I'm writing about over there.
And we'll also put links to all your socials, your website, your blog, and also to Swords and Circuitry as well.
Oh yes, yeah. That's the production company of my wife and I, is Swords and Circuitry Studios.
Neal, it's been awesome having you on the show. I feel like I only scratched the surface with you.
Well, I'm one of those people that I say, you on the jukebox and you put the quarter in and you get about 3 hours worth of play out of it or whatever. So I could talk all afternoon. I'm only having to stop, talking shortly is because I'm going over in a few minutes to meet with a friend of mine to hand her a badge to WonderCon. And so I'll probably be seeing Aaron and lots of some of my wonderful folks that I know that listen to your show. I'll probably be seeing several of them up at WonderCon next week.
Most definitely. Can't wait for it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks again. And thank you for listening to the Hall H Show podcast. Once again, thanks to our guest, Neal Hallford. Please learn more about him at nealhallford.com. Also check out swordsandcircuitry.com, and also please check out KrondorFFC.com to get more information on the Betrayal at Krondor Fan Film Challenge. Submissions are now open until May 12th. As you know, we love putting the spotlight on independent pop culture creatives like Neal. If you have a suggestion for a potential guest, please let us know by reaching out to us on social media or by filling out our contact form on our website, hallh.com. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent creators, we would appreciate a rating, hopefully 5 stars, and a comment on Apple Podcasts. And please spread the word on social media using the hashtag HallHShow. Peace, cheers, and stay safe out there.